The facts matter.
Some very important points about our creditor status and about how we're going to proceed, okay? And again, we're proceeding now because the environment and the time is right for us, okay? Now, and that brings me to another point. This whole coronavirus piece, okay? Corona means crown, and I'll let that marinate, okay? And so I'll move past that and say this. Their quarantines and their all the stuff that they're doing with regard to a coronavirus does not apply to the heirs at all. You will not hear of any heirs getting that. And if anyone puts a story out there, and again, you know, they haven't put a story out there yet except one, and I don't even know, his mother may be in Albion, I don't know. But they waited this long to put a story out there because that has no effect on the heirs. Okay. And all of the things that they say with regard to the coronavirus don't have anything to do with us. We're not in that jurisdiction. We're not in the coronavirus jurisdiction. We're not. That is a capitalist system. Okay? And that has nothing to do with us. So when they do quarantines and things like that, we
increase in prevalence in city communities and more densely populated communities. Our children and our adults tend to have more frequent diagnoses of asthma and tend to do worse with these types of conditions. And then other things that we might do habitually. So are you a smoker? Are you a drinker? And then our communities tend to not have immediate access to healthcare. And then on top of that, sometimes we're dealing with healthcare disparities. So are we being taken seriously when we present for medical attention? Is always putting out information. The World Health Organization is putting out daily updates. You can tune into these very readily on their social media platforms. They have done a great job of communicating the information that we need to know in lay terms that people can understand, and they're giving a global report. And then you can tune into your city and state, either local health departments or governing bodies who are giving updates online as well. We have to tackle this thing from every point that we can possibly tackle it so that we diminish the spread in our community so that we can flatten the curve. It's not going to go away quickly, but we all must do our part and really take this thing seriously if we're going to get ahead of it.
The U.S. Surgeon General, Dr. Jerome Adams, joins us from Washington. He is a member, of course, of the White House Coronavirus Task Force. Dr. Adams, good morning. Good to see you again.
Good morning. Good to be here.
I want to begin with those glimmers of hope that the White House has been pointing to. In New York State, our hardest hit state, hospitalizations and deaths have stabilized in the last couple of days. What does that tell us about the fight here and the fight in other emerging hotspots?
Well, absolutely. I started off the week telling Americans that this was going to be a really rough week, but I also wanted Americans to understand that when we've dealt with tough times in the past, the country has rallied. And what we're seeing now is the country is rallying. We're seeing New York and New Jersey have hospitalizations level off and start to come down. Deaths are starting to slow down and level off. And that's important because it tells us mitigation is working. It tells us what the American people are doing by staying at home, by social distancing, by practicing good hygiene, and the 30-day guidelines for America are actually effective, and they will help us get through to the other side of this unfortunate tragedy.
Dr. Adams, how can we be sure that mitigation is working as well as we hope it to be working when we don't know, to put it plainly, how many Americans actually have this virus because we don't have widespread testing? So to put it more bluntly, how do we know when we're in the clear and we can get back to normal if we don't know how widespread this is?
Well, there are two questions in there, and I'll quickly unpack both of them. The most important thing is that we know mitigation is working because when we look at the curves of Washington and California, we see that they've been very flat, and that's coincident with them instituting aggressive mitigation. We see Italy and Spain down on the downslopes of their curves, coincident with them starting mitigation. So we know mitigation is working. Now, you mentioned testing. Testing is a concern. We are going to be at 2 million tests this week, and it's rapidly ramping up with the commercial industry coming on board. We're also seeing more people doing antibody testing. So what I want the American people to know is I've talked with Admiral Jawad. I speak with him every day. He's our testing czar, and he assures me that by the end of this month, we should be not only just doing diagnostic testing, but also having good surveillance testing across the country. At 2 million people by the end of this week, we're getting really close to South Korea's initial testing surge numbers, and we are in fact doing surveillance testing in some parts of the country where they haven't seen a big increase in cases. So we're not there yet, but we are moving in the right direction.
And of course, that surveillance testing is so important. I want to touch on another point of concern, and that is the death rate among African Americans. In Louisiana, we heard the governor say 70% of the fatalities are people of color. In Chicago, we heard the mayor say more than 70% in that city. Your response to that, and should the CDC or the federal government be tracking this virus demographically to warn people?
Well, absolutely. The CDC and the federal government should be and are tracking this virus and trying to break it down by different demographic groups so that we can help people understand. But my office, long before COVID-19, has been talking about health equity, has been talking about the need to help people understand when they're at risk and to actually intervene. And when you look at being black in America, number one, people unfortunately are more likely to be of low socioeconomic status, which makes it harder to social distance. Number two, we know that blacks are more likely to have diabetes, heart disease, lung disease, and I've shared myself personally that I have high blood pressure, that I have heart disease and spent a week in the ICU due to a heart condition, that I actually have asthma and I'm pre-diabetic. And so I represent that legacy of growing up poor and black in America, and I and many black Americans are at higher risk for COVID. It's why we need everyone to do their part to slow the spread.
So, Doctor, I imagine that it's frustrating for you to hear those numbers, 70% of the dead in Louisiana, people of color, African Americans. Is there a particular recommendation you have for that community?
Well, my recommendation is to understand that you are at risk, you are not immune, and my recommendation is to all of America that we're really doing this to protect not just ourselves, but each other. Every single person who stays at home, whether you're white, black, brown, or yellow, is a person who is not spreading COVID and is a person who can protect their neighbors. When you wear a cloth facial covering, if you go outside, you're doing it to protect your neighbor. Now's really the time for us to come together and say, look, I'm doing this not just for me and my family, but I'm doing this for my community and all the communities across the country, and it is working. We will get through this. We are seeing progress, but America has the power to change the trajectory of this epidemic. The public really needs to keep doing their part.
All right, Dr. Jerome Adams, thank you very much for being here.